So from time to time, I'll get a request to play a DS or 3DS game on stream. And while I'd love to do that, I can't really do so in some circumstances. But why? After all, I have a 3DS. Well, it's actually because of the sorry state of capturing 3DS footage. Now, if the 3DS had just come out, I could totally understand this. But the problem is that we're over a decade removed from that, and we used to have good options. And what are those options? Well, the 3DS capture card board. This was by far the best method in terms of capture quality, as it allowed you to capture 3DS footage in full quality and full speed too. The drawback to this method, however, was that you'd have to send in your 3DS to someone to have them install the board for you, or try it yourself if you really felt so inclined. Now, I'm using a lot of past tense for this method, and that's because this method is basically impossible anymore. 3DS capture boards are incredibly difficult to come by nowadays, and people who actually install it are even more sparse. Actually, while editing this video, I finally managed to find a couple people who are supposedly selling 3DS capture board installations. But aside from the fact that I have no clue if these are up to date or not, considering this was basically the only place I could find them, there's one other major problem. They're British. Every so often I'll check if the situation has changed, but with no luck. And 3DS models with the boards pre-installed can cost several $100s. So in order to actually use the best method, you'd have to find an already rare 3DS capture board, as well as go out of your way to install it on your own, buy one secondhand for way too much, or build a time machine. Yeah, good luck, pal. Now, I have no clue why this has happened. Maybe it's because Katsukitty, the big name behind 3DS capture boards, got shut down due to a Japanese law that bars people from modding game consoles. But with that all being said, you'd still think that people from outside Japan would sort of pick up the slack, but I guess not, huh? So congratulations, the best method for 3DS capture is no longer available to you. But hey, that's okay, there's still a couple more options. The next option is using an emulator. Now don't get me wrong, DS and 3DS emulators have come a long way, with DS emulation being arguably borderline perfect. However, you still might run into trouble with some games. But overall, I highly recommend this option. Is what I'd say if the 3DS didn't have a small little problem. For basically any other system with this type of issue of being unable to capture video from it, I'd just say this is the best option. But you see, the 3DS has this sort of second screen. Crazy, I know. So what's the problem? Well, any game that has any sort of reliance on the touchscreen, especially a heavy one, might as well be unplayable. If there are entire sections of the game where you have to play with a touchscreen, you should probably just quit now. Using a mouse doesn't feel right, since you have to click on things and track the mouse in a different way you would the stylus, which doesn't make it nearly as intuitive to use on the fly, but it also might not register the same way. Alternatively, if you have a drawing tablet, you could use the drawing pen on there, but you're still sort of having to guide it around, and it's not nearly as simple to pick up and use as the stylus is, making touchscreen sections a hassle at best. And let me remind you that sometimes these things just decide they won't work properly on an emulator. I don't know if it's because of having to keep pen pressure on the touchscreen, which you can't exactly do on an emulator. As an easy example, these sections in Bowser's Inside Story, which I can do nearly perfectly on a regular DS, suddenly barely work on an emulator. Maybe I'm doing something wrong? Who knows? It's all an annoying mess to me. I say that if the game doesn't rely much or at all on the touchscreen, then go right ahead and use an emulator. But if not, well, again, don't worry, we have a couple more options. Wireless capture card. Yeah, that's right, a wireless capture card. Well, that sounds great, right? Well, there are a couple caveats to this option too. You see, this sends the signal over Wi-Fi, which means its capture quality is partially dependent upon how many devices are on your network. But let's say you clear all of that up somehow. On a new 3DS or 2DS model, you can get 20 to 40 FPS. And while, don't get me wrong, 40 isn't horrible, and if you could consistently keep things at 30, while it wouldn't be stellar, it could certainly be dealt with, you can't really do that. Also, gameplay has a tendency to be a bit choppy. Oh, but it could be worse. This does run on older 3DS models too, at 10 to 15 FPS. Yeah, okay, now that's a lot closer to flat out unwatchable. Also, this method can't record regular DS games, so you're out of luck there too. Honestly, I think that using the wireless capture card on a new 3DS is better than nothing, and the quality is decent enough, though it isn't exactly preferred. And it still leaves old 3DS owners with the same issue. But don't worry, I have one more method left. A camera. Pull out a camera, point it at the screen, and film like it's the Dark Ages.
I want you to realize that keeping everything on screen... Wait, hang on. Yeah, let's just do this like it's the Dark Ages. Yeah. What? You mean the lighting's off? No, it's fine. It's fine, what are you talking about? No, this is great. Holding it, like, as far out from my body as humanly possible. Yeah, that's incredibly comfortable. Yeah, I can play like this. Okay, so after like 5 minutes of this, my arms are gonna start hurting. Here, let's try this. Yeah, it's good. This is good, yep. Man, for crying out loud, I missed again. I hope I don't miss again.
Okay, seriously, what the hell? How the hell did we regress this far? I even see some tutorials recommending this method, because at least it's an easy method to use.
Is this some kind of joke?
I could sort of understand this if Nintendo made the 3DS so difficult to beat that not even modding boards into it could get an output from it. But no, we had that. We had that years ago. But now for some reason, we're all just supposed to go back to recording our screens with the camera. What gives? And yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's literally all the options. And yeah, this is just kinda sad. So what do we do about it? Well, I have a couple ideas that I want to see are feasible. But before I suggest them, I'd like to give my wish list for 3DS capture. It isn't too long, but I'd like it out there regardless. 1. It needs to capture 3DS games in good enough quality. Now when I say good enough quality, I am not expecting full uncompressed quality like some people might. And for crying out loud, the 3DS screen is 240p on both screens. I just want good enough quality that it doesn't look like this. 2. It needs to capture DS games. One of the biggest hurdles for this is being able to capture regular DS games, since software solutions will have difficulty breaking through into the DS layer. Can it be done? Who knows? I guess we'll have to find out as we go. 3. It shouldn't require hardware mods or devices if possible. Now depending on the solution, this may be difficult, and I can understand that, but I prefer the solution to not involve any extra hardware, let alone the design of some brand new thing. We don't need another issue like the original 3DS capture boards had, and especially no modding of the internals of the 3DS if at all possible. Plug and play if we can. Make any designs that do require some form of hardware open source so that everything doesn't just vanish one day. But even better is making this use something that most everyone either already has or is trivially easy to acquire. More on that in a minute. 4. Make it free if possible. Now this may not work if this requires a hardware solution, but if possible, especially if we're using a software solution, make this free of charge. Don't have the key to the ultimate 3DS capture card locked behind a paywall. Now if there's hardware involved, then I can understand having to pay for that. Now then, what are my solutions? Well, I have 3. But let me say this.
I have no talent.
I have no real background in some of these things, and a lot of this stuff I only have vague knowledge about the technology or something similar to it. The only reason I'm even putting these ideas out here is because I've never seen them mentioned anywhere else. SD card pros, way higher bandwidth capabilities, and would likely be much easier to mod from a software perspective. The cons. If the SD card slot is being taken up by an actual SD card, which it usually is, this will mean either figuring out some way to pass the actual SD card through to the system, or simply being unable to use your SD card and anything on it at all while capturing. It would require the creation of an entirely new device, at least for the streaming aspect of it. DS mode will likely have no clue what to do with it, making it extremely difficult, if not impossible to use there, and the SD card slot can be tedious at best to get to on newer 3DS models. The pros of the analog port. The SD card slot is still free and you can use it for whatever you need to use. Audio already goes through there, so I guess you could argue we're already halfway there. We've got audio at least. It won't require any other hardware to be made or purchased, and it will be easier to get working in DS mode. The DS at least expects an audio port, but it likely has no clue about an SD card slot. However, here are the cons. I have no clue how much data can be put through an analog audio out. Probably not very much though. This also means that any video output will probably be rather compressed, although honestly, again, I'm not trying to get the most raw, uncompressed video out of the 3DS anyway, I just want good enough. Which means if you want to use the 3DS's audio out while capturing, yeah, I don't think that's happening. The absolute minimum data throughput for something usable seems to be 1.5 to 2 megabits per second, and something preferable would be closer to 4 megabits per second or higher. Yes, I know you'd need a lot more to get the full quality, but that's not really what I'm looking for here. Like I said, I just want something that's good enough. The final idea I have involves the card slot. This may be easier said than done, and would likely require additional hardware to be made, but wouldn't it be cool to have a capture card as an actual DS game card? It could also have a pass-through for game data to go through. Plus, both DS and 3DS mode will expect something in the game card area. The idea is actually similar to the design of the DS Action Replay cards, which is where I got the idea. Just have a card with a USB port and capture hardware inside. Of course, coaxing the 3DS to actually send video data through there would certainly be easier said than done. Pros. Both modes are expecting a game card slot. It would also likely have higher bandwidth capabilities compared to the audio jack. However, here are some cons. This would require additional hardware to be made, there's literally no way around that. Also, the 3DS might not be so easily convinced to send video data through to the card. And would this implementation impact bandwidth capabilities of the card slot? And if so, how dependent is the 3DS upon certain timings? The last thing before I conclude is that the 3DS reading game data from the card slot, depending on how things go, may become less and less of an issue as time goes on. A lot of people just buy digital games now, and now that 3DS games are pretty soon going to be relegated to the realm of second-hand online sellers, I wouldn't be surprised if many people forego the card slot entirely when it comes to the actual game aspect, so all of the issues about game card bandwidth being impacted may be negated in a few years' time anyway, if not sooner. I've had this idea for a while, so I figured I'd share it. I'm not going to pretend like the idea will be easy, especially with the analog out port, as most computers can't just detect audio through a line in, which means some sort of even just basic software would also need to be developed so that the computer will know that it's not just white noise or something. The most difficult part, though, is going to be how to basically trick the 3DS to output something like this through that port. That's not to say it's impossible, as obviously we're able to do this over Wi-Fi. The even more difficult part would be trying to get the DS mode to play along. Ultimately, I think this would be interesting to see, especially given the fact that 3DS capture boards seem to be getting more and more rare and or expensive, and to me the Wi-Fi option is not the most fun to use, from both a viewing and a usability standpoint. I'm honestly tired of the methods we have now, and I'd like for something that's actually on par with what we were getting before. Is this even feasible? Again, who knows? I'm just throwing the idea out there. However, if someone does end up using one of these ideas, it'd be cool if I was at least credited for it somewhere. Regardless, it's my hope that eventually someone will come up with a solution for the 3DS capture card problem. Well, thank you all for watching, and take care.